All right.
It's for all my friends and Stickam.
All my Stickam friends. What up, my Stickam friend? My
Stickam
Stickam fam. So, Tracy Scott, I
So-
think all the people know who you are, and this is my brother. For anybody who doesn't know, and
I am.
we're well acquainted with one another. But I think our lives have taken very strange turns from where we thought they might years and years ago, right? One thing I want to talk about a lot on this podcast is our faith and our faith journey. So I would love for you to actually start with, we were raised in a Christian home. Just to catch everybody up, we were raised in a Christian home, a great Christian mom, single mom with 3 kids. And I would love to know, growing up in that home with the type of Christian mother that we had, right? Because every mom is different. Every Christian is different. So with our family dynamic, our mom watching her faith grow and develop and change over the years, but still be consistent, right? I would love to for you to catch people up on kind of how you think your faith grew at home, but then transitioned as you kind of got older. As you became your own person, as you became somebody who wanted to be serious about the Lord and taking church attendance seriously and things like that, and reading your Bible, where it goes from this mode of like, I've always learned these things, I've always known these truths about God, but I want to try to know God myself. So I'd love to hear you talk just a little bit about kind of how that started for you when you made that transition.
First off, I'd probably say the example set in our house growing up was better than most. I would consider our mom very devout. One thing I remember for sure is, I guess, her consistency when it came to what was good and what is evil. Like, she kind of always stuck to her guns and didn't compromise. And in fact, she always said that, like, don't compromise your beliefs, you know what I mean? And there were a lot of things that she wouldn't back down on. Some of those might have been things such as watching witchcraft on TV, like Harry Potter and, Lord of the Rings, all these things that we weren't allowed to watch in our household. Obviously, things change as you get older and you kind of define for yourself, like, what's acceptable and what's not. There's always a limit of what isn't acceptable. But that's sort of different for everyone, I think. Something else I remember specifically was how consistent our mom was with tithing. That has impacted me a lot, even into today. We didn't grow up, well off financially. And so one thing I always did see is...
We didn't?
Yeah. Good one. But... I definitely remember mom always being so consistent with tithing her money when, she didn't always have it. And it reminds me of, the lady in the New Testament when she gives like 1 coin or 1 penny or whatever it is that she has, she gives that to the ministry, and Jesus says that she's blessed because of it, because she gave out of her poverty rather than out of her abundance. And so things like that. One thing we saw growing up, I don't know if you remember or not, but because of that consistent tithing, mom would always say it comes back to you, tenfold if you, whatever you give to God. And so there were times where we would just get tremendously blessed. Like, every Christmas, her church mailbox, she never knew who it was. Someone would just give an envelope of money to like help out for the holidays and stuff, with her having 3 kids and being single. And
or people show up on our doorstep with a box of food at Thanksgiving, or all kinds of stuff
every single year. Family,
right.
Friends and stuff. Even something else, and this one is nuts. One time mom was praying at the kitchen table, and I specifically remember it was, I want to say it was, we needed school supplies, or like it was a certain time of the year where we needed something, and she did not have the money for it. And she was at the kitchen table reading her Bible. That was her spot where she did Bible study, you know. And then she was praying about it and praying about finances. And we got a knock on the door. And she went and answered the door. It was some friends of ours. Actually, can I name them?
I name whoever you want.
The Combs family.
Combs.
Carrie
Yeah,
Combs,
yeah.
Steve Combs. Yeah, grew up around the block from them. So it was Carrie Combs at the door, and she handed Mom like $300 out of nowhere. And she was like, hey, I don't know why, but God just told me to give this to you, you know?
Right.
And when those things happen, like, not just when they happen once, when they consistently happen, like when you grow up in a household for 18 years and you see a family get blessed, that certainly shapes who you are as a believer.
Yeah.
You know, I think that we're supposed to worship in spirit and in truth, and the truth being God's word, and then spirit, in my opinion, being having to do with our experiences, right? There's a lot of people who base their faith off of experiences, and then when they don't experience it,
Right.
after a while, they don't have anything to fall back on, and they fall away. I've seen that happen. So I think that those experiences are good, like what we had when we're growing up, and we see those miraculous things happen, and prayers get answered. But if we're not careful and we're not in God's word consistently, like throughout our adult life, if we don't experience something for a certain amount of time, then I do believe that, you know, we'll possibly fall away or whatever.
Yeah, I think experiences, when you talk about apologetics and, you know, proving to people that God is real, proving to people why faith matters, why church matters, the strongest apologetic in my life for God has actually been two pillars. One of them, I mean, you can call it experiential, I guess, but something can't come from nothing, right? So you could say, well, then God couldn't come from nothing. It's like, well, for some reason, God existing forever makes way more sense to me than stuff, material, matter just kind of was there. And it's like, well, how was it there? It's like, well, I don't know. Like, you have the same conundrum, but you have that. It makes more sense to me that God could always exist and then create everything. So that's kind of the first one. The second one is the amount of times that I've seen God provide for me. Yeah, like, to 100% agree with what you said. Like, the amount of times we've seen random people show up in more ways than we'll ever probably know. I mean, you know, no single mom wants to put everything on blast, every way that she's been helped. But I don't think we probably saw half of what God did through other people. And so that's, you know, that's another reason I love these conversations and want to have so many on this channel, is because I've had such great faith experiences and such great church experience, but I know that is not everybody's experience. And not everybody has seen kind of some of the miraculous things that we have seen. So as your faith began to develop, you kind of held on to that as well, kind of what you had experienced through the body of Christ, it sounds like, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think back then I probably didn't think about it as God providing that way, but as you grow up, you kind of, you start thinking, how did I get here?
Hindsight's 20/20.
Hindsight, man. Yeah. And so you get to see miracles kind of in the past, and you didn't think there were miracles then. You just thought, like, okay, a random person showed up with food. But it's kind of like being a parent now, at least for me. I understand that when you're strapped and you're afraid that you can't provide a roof for your wife, or you can't, you know, money is super tight, and, you know, especially with little kids, like, I just don't know what it would be like to live paycheck to paycheck. Like, thank God that, you know, I'm kind of not in that position in my life. You're not either. But so many people are. And I think it changes your faith. So I think watching our mom grow up with such strong faith, because she had to rely on the Lord, right? She had to rely on the church and the Lord, and we did too, kind of as a byproduct of that. And so, yeah, forever grateful for people like the Combs family, the Wood family, you know, James and Lisa, and all of them, and many others that we couldn't even name. But as you took those experiences and moved away from those experiences, you come to a place kind of when you're kind of the college age. Like, we grew up in youth group. going to church, every single Sunday, going to youth group Sunday nights, even Wednesday night stuff, sometimes, mission trips, retreats, all of that stuff in like middle school, high school, kind of forced to do it. When do you actually think you got to the point in your faith where you wanted to participate? Like, because you thought this was real, you experienced God. Do you think that was like elementary school, middle school, high school? Do you think that happened like more like after, like college age type deal?
I'll say it like this. There were a lot of times growing up where, like you said, we were kind of forced to participate, or at least we had a bunch of our friends participating with us. Sure. So it wasn't that bad. Like right. In a youth group you like ours,
you could bear it.
Exactly. Yeah. You get to do lots of fun things.
Right.
Like, but I think I wanted to participate back then. Like I remember feeling God's spirit even in middle school, high school. But there definitely was a point to where it was around that college age time, like you said, where you really start to question things as you become a young adult and sort of live your life, not completely outside of, but apart from some of the things that you grew up with, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like if you're not going to the same church or you're no longer in the same youth group, kids that go to college get exposed to all these ideas that they kind of are sheltered from. Sure. Growing up. I mean, just all these different viewpoints, because they're no longer under their parents' roof and they're curious, Yeah. They might even have professors saying certain things and mocking God. That happens. But I came to a point to where I got more serious about the truth, whatever that was. And it was when I was 18 years old. I went to Bible college for 1 semester. School really was not my thing, at least back then. So I came home. I was no longer in the band that I was in. I had gotten out of a relationship and then just started working full time. So there were, and kind of felt like a failure because college didn't work out for me. So I was I would call it a low point. And I was like just really bitter, questioning everything, got really hungry for the truth, and all of a sudden got all of these questions thrown at me about scripture and about the Bible and like how is it legitimate and all these things. Yeah. Because you have, for as many people that we know who completely believe the Bible and back it up, there's way more people around us every day who are on the opposite side. And a lot of them have arguments for it. You know what I mean? And I had a lot of atheist friends that I used to hang out with back then. So that being the case, I just started questioning everything at that point. I was 18, maybe 19 by then. And there were some questions that I couldn't answer, and that, scripture at least didn't answer the way that I wanted it to, or the wording that I needed, something like that. Yeah. So I remember just diving into the Bible, seeking it out. Like if this was a faith I was going to live by, then I had to know why I believed it. Not just that I experienced all these things growing up and the blessing of God on our family, but I needed to know that the truth was true. Right. So I went to CCC at one point and sat in Luke Erb's office with him, the rabbi.
Oh, Luke, I hope you see this.
Dude's a gangster, man.
Don't inflate his head. Don't do it. Don't give him that street cred, though.
Anyway, yeah, I remember I sat in his office with him one day with a list of questions that I wrote out that I was like, how is this possible? You know what I mean? Like it was like a lot of cosmic questions that I just wanted to comprehend God, right. And I couldn't do it. It was like basically, how has God always existed? Yeah. Like what was before God, and what was before that? Like all of these things that it's just like, if you think about on a logical scale as human beings, like all we know is beginning and end in our world, even our universe. According to the Bible, even time, like time had a beginning.
So you just start tripping out on these
exactly all these
yeah.
cosmic questions, and I was like, so all we know is beginning, cause and effects, beginning and end. And so I was just tripping out on like, how did God not have a beginning?
Right.
Like it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And it's because, eventually there's some of those questions that you want like crazy new ideological answers to, you know what I mean? That just sound profound, but it really comes down to the conclusion of like accepting your own morality.
Yeah.
And that's what it was for me. Like how can a finite being like me completely comprehend an infinite being?
Sure.
Like I can't comprehend infinite because all I know is beginning and end, cause and effects, start, finish. So it was just coming, coming around.
I have good
to
friends
that.
that say the idea of infinity is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like of eternity past and eternity future. Like that's just like bogus, right?
And in this point in eternity, like why did God choose this point to create the universe? And it's like, I don't know. Yeah, there's too many of those cosmic questions that like you can't really answer.
So do you think
we
think
still have been given so much
right
to prove what we believe? So
do you think he was able to give you any answers that really helped you, like helped propel you forward, or did it console you maybe that he didn't have exact answers for you? Because like how can you describe God's infinite being, right? I mean, nobody can really comprehend that necessarily. So did you think you got answers that you really needed, or did you think you saw somebody who had enough faith without the answers that propelled your faith forward?
Maybe a mix of both.
Okay.
Yeah. And that being over 10 years ago, I can't specifically. I know, man, I'm getting up there. I got these gray hairs. I just cut my hair though, so hopefully you can't see them.
We're not going to talk about
but yeah, so he might have given me a couple answers that like really made sense to me, but I think a lot of it was just like, hey, you're not gonna ever understand every question that you have,
right?
Like no matter what you believe, how true and concrete it is, like there will always be opposing opinions, and there will always be questions in your mind that you're not going to have the answer that you want to it. You might get an answer to it, but you're just looking for something a little different to ease you, and you might not get it.
Right. I think when I find myself questioning, my specific faith, like the Christian faith, or even others, it's like, man, you know what? They don't have answers either. Like the answers to my questions that I have that kind of have almost caused shipwreck to my faith, like other religions can't answer them. And so, you're really left with a lot of the same questions and the same doubts. Okay, what is this? This book was written by people, but was written by God, but was written through prophets. But, people had flaws. And does the Bible have flaws? And
there were books left out of the Bible.
Right.
What about those?
Right. Yeah. So I really think I don't think any of the other religions are good at answering the questions that I had. I want to back up for a second. Before you took a semester, was it a semester, a year at Bible college?
One semester.
Crossroads. There's a difference in our lives in exploring and taking our faith seriously. And I think we all, again, we get to that point where we have to decide it's not going to be our parents' faith anymore. It's not going to be our family's faith. I have to decide, is this for me, right? And am I going to take God at his word? Am I going to start living by a biblical worldview and biblical principles? And am I going to try to walk like Jesus? And, even taking it a step further, not just am I going to try to live like Jesus, but am I going to try to make disciples of other people in a good way? I say that in the best way possible, because even when you start talking about making disciples, I think that sounds really, really weird to people who don't have a church background or are not Christians. But how has Jesus been making me like him, and how can I help others continue that as well and live better than me, to live like Jesus, right? The example he set. But before that point, you took a weird turn into some things that you probably shouldn't have been in, right? In high school. Same with me. I think all high schoolers are trying to figure out, you know, okay, my family has this faith, but my friends are having fun in this way, and this way, and this way, you know, whether it's like drinking or drugs or things you start dabbling in, premarital sex, you know, anything that you kind of think is like bad, right? But then there are some things that are kind of excusable. It's like, okay, like it's kind of weird to smoke weed in high school, but it's okay to drink, right? Or it's okay to sleep around, but it's not okay to smoke weed or to drink, or like you kind of put up your own set of morality. And as a Christian, I think I found myself, and you found yourself too, you know, and I'll let you share what you want to share, kind of what your past is like. Because I think that's really important for people to understand. It's not like you grow up in church and then you're just like you're trying to be these perfect people. And it's like, no, you're trying to figure out kind of through your actions what you believe. And I think sometimes then it takes some maturing to figure out what your faith is going to look like in practice, not just like, because I would have always told people, like, even when I was like a really, I was just like a bad drunk, sort of. It's like I would get drunk.
Tell me about
at
it.
Parties and start talking to people about Jesus and things like that. And it was like, I would have some amazing conversation, like some of the best conversations I've ever had about faith and doubt and Jesus were when I was just like hammered at a party and everybody else was passed out. And it was like me and two other dudes still awake, you know, playing beer pong or playing pool or whatever it was. And so some of those conversations like were amazing. Now, did they remember those conversations? I don't know. Did I remember all of them? I don't know. Right. But there was something innately in me and always has been in me to want to share Jesus with people and to want to see them. I think at the time, like, go to heaven, right? Because you kind of think through a lens of heaven and hell. Are people going to make it? Are they not going to make it? And that, you know, for me, that always weighed really heavy in my conscience because our mom cared about that a lot, right? And so I think for you, as you started dabbling in different things, kind of like, what did your past look like? What things have you come out of? And how do you think you really kind of started to come out of those patterns of behavior? Again, share what you want. I can cut out anything.
With a censor? No, I'm just playing.
With a censor.
Yeah, I guess just a lot of the normal teenage things. But the kicker about that is normal teenage things oftentimes are sin.
Sure.
It's normal for everyone else, but
sure,
for being in a faith of any kind, it's usually wrong. So there's sort of a different standard that we're called to live by. And I think in high school that's hard to wrap your mind around because everyone else can do stuff sort of guilt-free, you know? None of my friends had to have a guilty conscience about smoking weed or having sex with their girlfriend or whatever because it's normal. You know, it's what the world does. But yeah, some of the specific struggles, I definitely smoked a lot of weed. Definitely was having premarital sex. That one's really interesting. I remember back in youth group, we were always taught the way that something like that could affect your future marriage and your relationship with your spouse. And, you know, back then we were kind of like, you know, they're just saying that because they have to. Yeah, we shouldn't do it, but it can't be that bad. I can definitely testify to that. I still think about that. I look back and I'm like, they really were not messing around. You know, like it
affected you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have fully experienced that.
Yeah.
So yeah, kids, listen to your youth pastors.
Kids.
And
we had great youth pastors.
We did
too. Yeah. I remember one of the most powerful things for me was struggling with, you know, really kind of like drinking a lot, you know, kind of whenever I could get to. And, you know, of course you're kind of living like, you feel like you're kind of living two separate lives because, and anybody in church, like who grew up in church, and was active in youth group probably experienced this to some extent. It was like you felt like, all right, like I'm fooling around. You know, I'm doing things I know that I'm not supposed to be doing. And I don't know if it was just a sense of morality at that point that like, hey, these are the rules and you're breaking the rules of your faith, or it was like, hey, this actually like breaks the heart of your Heavenly Father. And I think for the longest time, I didn't care as much about that one as I did, hey, you're supposed to look like a Christian. So that was a thing too, is like, well, when you get called out on being, it's like, oh, I want to talk to people about Jesus, but it's like, well, hey man, like I saw what you just did, like in there. You've been drunk the last 3 nights. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you're not any different than I am. And I think that's a common problem just with the church in general, is people, even as you get older, it's like, well, you're just a bunch of hypocrites. Why would I want to profess Jesus and give up these other things in my life if like you don't even seem like you are either, right? But there was definitely a conviction that I shouldn't be doing a lot of things, but then having people you could talk to that were older, it's like I generally, like, to be really honest, I didn't care that adults were just like at youth group because I wasn't telling them what I was going through. Now, I think I started appreciating them more as I got older and was able to actually express things I was going through and then not be judged for them. Like I remember, you know, one of our youth pastors, I won't say him by name because I don't think it would be right, but
you know who you are.
I love him to death, really, would do anything for him. And, you know, he was one of those ones that I remember on a retreat, it was like, hey, how are you doing? And I honestly couldn't tell him that I was doing well. I couldn't even fake it at that point. It was just kind of like I had sat through church, I think, still drunk so many Sundays that it was like people have to know. People have to know. Like my friends who I'm sitting with from youth group, sitting with them on Sunday mornings at church in like a big group, they have to know. They have to smell it. They have to know something, you know, is going on. And so, you know, for me, it felt like once I was actually able to break that open to a youth pastor who actually didn't condemn me, who didn't tell my mom, who didn't, you know, turn me into the police for some things that I had shared, you know, it was like, that was so freeing and refreshing that he didn't say, hey, you really need to stop doing this, but to say, hey, you know, I went through that too, and I've been there, and I have no way to judge you. I have no stones to throw at you. I just want you to know I love you. And I'm glad you told me, you know, and we can keep having this conversation and, you know, I hope that you're able to come out of this stuff. You know, if you feel like obviously it has a hold on you, that's not good. So I think, you know, you moved on sort of from that into some different relationships. You got more serious about your faith. I know that you have friends, obviously, that you've probably parted ways with over the years, as have I, that, you know, we're great friends, but it's kind of like you get serious about your faith or you take a different direction in life and suddenly you're just not hanging out anymore. But you have some good friends that you have still stayed in contact with. I would love to know, do you think your friendships have played like a huge part in that? Or do you think it's really just kind of like been, this is my journey. This is like, I'm keeping me accountable. You know, what do you think about that?
I won't necessarily say it's because of like me still being on this path of faith. I wouldn't say it's because of the friends that I had back then, because I don't hang out with most of those people anymore. A lot of them, you know, depending on, there was a lot of different circles of friends. A lot of them that were in the church back then are not now.
Right.
Maybe the majority of them. It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
But I guess even if it wasn't because of my friend groups that are still with me, I think it is because of the body of Christ in general.
Sure.
The one thing that I always, especially this last couple years, I try to keep in mind that the body of Christ is there for a reason. We're not supposed to do this alone. We're not supposed to live this life or this Christian walk alone.
Right.
And I think that I know that when people isolate themselves for too long, that's when it's dangerous. That's when they start getting picked off.
Right.
And I've seen that happen to a lot of friends who I grew up with who are in the faith. It's like once you stay out of church for a period of time, it gets harder to go back.
Yeah.
And I've even gone through, mostly because of laziness, and this was years ago, but I remember going through portions of life where like we would fall out of our weekly Bible study, or I would sleep in 2 or 3 Sundays in a row, and all of a sudden I found myself like not really having the desire to go to church on Sunday and get out of bed, or these routine things that you're like, it's just like another thing in the week. I don't really want to do it. It's so much effort. So I can definitely see that like a lot of those friends I used to hang out with, they've been out of the church for so long, and here and there I'll see them, I'll talk to them, invite them to church, have a faith conversation, because like it's like if you once believed it, it's always going to be on your mind. It's not completely leaving.
Go away.
You can act like it's not going to, you can act like it doesn't bother you, but like everyone contemplates eternity and life and death. So, I just have those conversations when I can nowadays.
Right. But one of the things I've always said about you is, and I kind of joke with people because I even ran into somebody last week who said, like, oh my gosh, your brother's a tattoo artist now. Like I feel like he can just do everything. And I always tell them, my brother can master something in 6 months that it takes most people 6 years to do. You had jumped into, sort of to move past like your early faith, journey and everything. You had, you were married, you started getting into music production, but at the time you were working, you were working at a factory, right?
Yep.
So you had worked at multiple factories or the same place?
I worked at one place for about 1.5 years, and then I worked at Cummins for about 8 years.
Okay.
So mostly at the same place.
And then like third shift for a ton of that, right?
Some of it.
The
first year or two.
Okay. So you eventually got hired on there. You totally weren't satisfied with that. I mean, as I would say would you say most of your friends who worked there were not, like, didn't quite want to be there?
Oh, no one
There's nothing to do with
no
the
one
place.
It
was nothing to do with Cummins. It's just like nobody wants to work at a factory forever,
yeah.
Right? Like that's not their goal most of the time. But you started dabbling in a bunch of other stuff too. And so I say the skills part, like you kind of master a lot of things really quickly. You started in music production. Was that just kind of for fun? I don't even know how you did that. Between that and then your artistry and like tattoo artistry, did you just dabble in those things for fun at first, and then, or did you plan like, hey, I think I'm going to make a career out of these things. I want to kind of just like let art flow through these different avenues. So like starting with music, you picked that up several years earlier than tattooing. So was that something that you were like, man, I think like, let me just try this?
For me, reflecting on it, I think I needed an outlet because I had done music previously, a different kind,
sure.
Like being in a metal band. Music was something that I was very passionate about. I still am.
Right.
But at that time I needed an outlet, something creative, something to work hard on and build on. My job wasn't hard.
Sure.
It was just boring.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to be there, but I actually heard, I started music when I heard NF actually for the first time. A friend of mine at work showed him to me. We were sitting there listening to him at work.
He's going to hear this.
And
so mind what you say.
I just want to tattoo him.
Okay.
Let's hang out.
All right. I'm going to send in this clip.
Let's do it. But yeah, so when I heard him for the first time, when I started music, and the reason why was because someone finally put into words like certain ways that I feel. And I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? I'm passionate about music. I've never necessarily tried to write hip-hop music before,
right.
But he inspired me to try it. So like it was probably at work. I just one day started writing down thoughts and lyrics, you know what I mean? Really
freaking
trying
Eminem,
to,
man.
Yeah, I know. And that's how it, but that's how it starts, man. You just get that little spark of inspiration when you previously like have none,
right?
You know, and at that time in life, I really didn't creatively. I was just
Yeah.
trying to work that job and be a normal adult. And so started writing music, and then started making beats with the program that I downloaded so that I could do my own music with it, not so I could produce music for other people. So I, started putting out projects and recording songs and just learning that whole process.
Right.
And then that ended up leading me to, I was so picky about my own music, and it was just mind numbing trying to write all the time when I didn't feel like it. Although sometimes I enjoyed it, but then I just got into the production side of it because I really enjoyed even more just using instruments and making beats and tracks and melodies, the actual creation of it.
Right.
So yeah,
that was the part I hate. Like, I hate
the tedious part of it.
Tedious, like, orchestration. Like, even thinking about the fact that I'm gonna have to chop up this podcast is like so daunting, and I hate like the little minute cuts and moves, and it's just so much. And so I remember watching you do a lot of that stuff in the studio and just being like, dude, how did this guy, like, where did this come from? And I think a lot of people felt that way too when suddenly you put out an album that I'll never, oh my gosh, I'm gonna cry thinking about it, because we were sitting in Starbucks, and you remember this too. It was the first time you let me hear one of your songs. What was it? Thoughts and Perspective.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, I was like, how is that? Like, this is my brother. He created this crazy stuff.
It was
this crazy
so
music.
bad.
No,
too,
it's funny that you think it's bad, because like you were saying, you started getting really picky with yourself and the quality. So
because I started getting a lot better over the 5 years I was engulfed in it.
Yeah. So by album number 3 or something, you're just like, oh, don't even listen to my old stuff. Like, I'm so embarrassed. And everyone else would listen to it and be like, what are you talking about? And so. Yeah, that was really interesting watching you take that journey. I think it was really cool to be, I don't know, bro. I guess like part of that journey with you a little bit. Just whether it was like album artwork or things like that I remember doing that were just so much fun to, like, oh, I got to create this thing for him on top of this huge body of work that he's created. And then I think, it took a different form when you're actually listening to, because it's not like you can listen to a song and be like, oh man, this song is like, this sounds really good. But then when you start listening to the words, you're really pouring out your heart. So much so that our mom was so worried about you because of your music and the things that you were talking about. I think there's something to artistry that's really dark, can be, but it can also be so filled with life and filled with energy and hope. And, I think artists sort of take on this vibe of, like, you kind of get stuck in this one sort of lane, but it also is very, very telling of how you feel and where your spirit is and where your heart is and things that you're struggling with. And I think your music was like super, super honest, which was really refreshing. It's like there's several genres of music that you can sing a whole song, you can write a whole album, and you can listen to it and you're like, I feel like you didn't say anything. There was nothing like substantive in this artwork.
Yeah, honestly, and I talk about this with people all the time, like, because Eminem is so popular, and NF actually is always compared to Eminem,
right?
For having a similar sound. But I've never liked Eminem because he doesn't say anything. Like, he can say 10,000 words in a song, and there was no substance there. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, I've just never been a fan. But then
I'm going to send this clip to him too.
Cool. That's fine, man.
He won't care. He'll write a diss track about you.
He will. Yeah.
And he'll throw NF in it.
Just give me some royalties for
that's right.
The track being about me.
Pay me my money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then you listen to someone like NF, and there's just so much substance and feeling, and it's like, oh, I can actually relate to this, and it sounded good, and the beat was dope.
Right.
It's like, why can't more people do that?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Well, I guess, some of this transitions into, like, your music, a lot of it was, I would say it was Christian. If you had to put, like, a genre on it, it was, like, Christian hip-hop maybe, or, I don't know, what would you call it?
Probably Christian hip hop.
I mean, and some artists don't really like to be put in like this box. I remember hearing Johnny Swim. I love Johnny Swim. I'd love them to listen to this too. But I remember hearing them for the first time and being like, what in the world? Like, I feel like this sounds so different. The vocal melodies and harmonies were just like fire, right? And I was just like, this is simple music, like so much of it, but it's just like absolutely beautiful. Found out that they were Christians, but they don't like to like wear that on their sleeve exactly because they don't want to be roped into and like stuck in this box of like Christian music or like Christian artists, right? Because then, you know, you see people, you know, I would say like Lauren Daigle and, you know, some people from like Maverick City or something that like as soon as you step outside this little bitty box, people start to say like, you're not a legit Christian, you're a false teacher, you're, you know, whatever. And so I think it's really cool that people can create art out of being Christian that doesn't have to be Christian art. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Like it's like this label that's on it. It's like, I am a Christian and I make art. And so a lot of times that means you like, well, what do you mean it's Christian music? You're not, this isn't like a worship song. And it's like, well, like God didn't say, hey, only write worship songs or only write songs that are directed at me. You know, we put kind of these rules around ourselves in the art world that I don't think God has necessarily called us to do. Me personally, I love worship music. I love, you know, writing worship music, leading worship, you know, from the stage. And that just like really, there are times I feel like I was just made to do that. And there are other people who feel like, hey, I'm a Christian. I feel like I was made to create art in whatever form it is, but like it doesn't explicitly say Jesus all over it. Right. And so when you transitioned into tattooing, I remember you were starting to draw, right? You just started kind of doing some creative drawing and writing. You hadn't done that in a long time. You said you used to like drawing. What year was that when you picked that up? How long ago? Maybe not the year, but what? That was
tattooing?
Yeah, 3 years ago?
January. It's already January. My 2-year mark's coming up.
2 years, okay.
And then I started drawing previous to that the year before.
Okay.
So I didn't grow up doing that type of art.
So before I forget, so that everybody watching, all 3 people, where can they see some of that work, some of your artwork?
You can see it on Facebook with the individual posts, or if you want to see my actual portfolio, you can see it on Instagram.
So is that Tracy Scott Tattoos? What is that?
Tracy Scott _ tattoos, I think it is.
Okay. Something with Tracy and Scott and tattoos, right?
I get my emails mixed up, my IG
yeah. But then also
too much stuff.
Golden Press. Don't you have a Golden Press?
That's our shop page for me and Liz. So Golden Press Tattoo.
Golden Press Tattoo. So your wife does tattoo work too, which is cool. Like it's got to be really awesome to work with your wife for one, working with separate clients. So it's like you're not always directly working with each other.
At work, it's more of just coexisting together.
Sure.
You know, it's like.
Well, that's some people's marriages altogether. So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm totally going to grab her and kiss her when people
okay.
walk out.
All right.
But, you know.
All right, this is a PG rated.
That's PG.
I'm just playing. So when you started getting into tattooing, I think one of the conversations that you and I had, and part of this channel is like, I get to have such great conversations with people that nobody else gets to hear. It's kind of like you would love to be a fly on the wall for some like awesome conversations that people have about their life and their faith and, you know, church and all this stuff. I would really love to know 2 different things. So the first thing is, how do you think, so show your arms for a second. Just show off. See, he's hiding everything, man.
Yes, my hairy arms.
I don't think people are looking at the hair on your arms. They're looking at your arms. So your boy has tattoos all over the place, right? Show him the neck. Just show him a little bit. Yep. So how do you think your experience, like being like totally tatted up, and, you know, Liz might have a similar experience. What do you think that's like walking into a church or like any new place, but specifically at church? Because that's kind of what these conversations are about. Do you feel people looking at you all the time? Let's throw in the gauges too, because I know I've seen little kids just stare at you as you walk by.
That's the bigger thing.
That's the bigger thing.
The gauges, yeah.
Sure.
Just because it's even more abnormal than tattoos in our culture.
Right.
At least having them this big.
Yeah. Well, they're big.
They're pretty big. But honestly, I guess since I'm so used to it and I grew up in church, I've always just felt home walking into a church. Now, I think for anyone walking into a brand new church that you've never been to, don't know if you know anyone there.
It's scary. Scary as crap.
That still is probably like, okay, like, I don't even know where I'm going in this place. You know, like a little weird.
Yeah.
But, you know, any of the people that I'm associated with in our town, or like, you know, the few churches that I've been to, like more than one or two, you know, I can walk in a lot of churches in this city and know people.
Yeah.
And be fine because I'm just used to the lifestyle of being a Christian.
Do you think people inherently just assume things about you when you're covered in tattoos?
Probably.
What do you think they assume about you?
I don't know. Prison?
Well,
that it could be a thing.
Tattoos don't look this good coming out of prison, bro.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's be really honest.
Yeah, I don't really know what they think. I don't know. Like, it's just so normal to me.
Yeah.
Like, when I see a tattooed person, I don't really think anything about them.
Right.
Actually.
You're lying.
No, the biggest thing with that, now that I think about it, is quality of tattoos.
Okay.
I'd rather
You're just a snob.
I'd rather have
You're a snob now.
Yeah, for sure. I'd rather someone have no tattoos and look clean cut than be covered in like junk tattoos.
Right.
You know?
Yep. No, that makes sense.
And I've even heard other people talk about, like, if you have, you know, people who aren't super tattooed, they'll say like it has everything to do with the stigma in our culture of like, if you're covered in like really good art, like if I'm looking at your arm and I'm like, oh my goodness, you know, like my eyes are going wide, like, because it's like an incredible piece of art. It's like looking in a museum at a painting or something like that. Like, more of, you can view it as fine art and like, that's amazing. Yeah. Rather than, you know, associate it immediately with like, that looks so bad and that person must be a piece of crap or whatever, you know, like whatever people might think.
You're just saying out loud what some people think.
Sure.
For sure. Which, you know, that sucks. Like, it really...
Mostly now, the older generation, to be honest. Like, tattoos in our culture now are so normal, and they're getting even more normal.
Do you think... Have you got any backlash anywhere? Like, did you do any kind of deep dive on, you know, because we've talked about taking your faith seriously. There's plenty of things, you know, that the scriptures deem sinful or like just, you know, ungodly or unwise. Is that something you really weighed out, like, kind of before you went on this journey to be a tattoo, not just to get tattoos, but to like be a tattoo artist? Did you consider that from like a faith standpoint? Were there questions that, you know, because I know that the Bible in the Old Testament talks about not getting tattoos, but then there's places where, like, well, it says in the New Testament that Jesus will come back with a mark on his thigh that is like described as a tattoo. Where did you go that direction? Where was your head at?
So I think my interpretation of the scriptures, I came to my conclusion a long time ago when I started getting tattoos, because I knew I wanted to just be covered even before I was ever in the tattoo industry myself. Addict. I guess, man. I just think it's cool. But yeah, like, and you know, this was 10 years ago where I did do more of deep dive type of things, and a lot of the things that I found were what people talk about when they speak of tattoos and faith and them not going together. I guess a lot of that stuff is taken out of context. Sure.
A lot of everything is taken out of context.
Yeah, and once I did the dive on those things, as far as like people marking themselves in certain cultures back in the day for the worship of false gods and things like this, it's like, well, if anything, I'm worshiping the one true God. Especially at first, all my tattoos were Christian tattoos. Like, it's like, why not start a conversation about my tattoos? And yeah, it's Adam and Eve on my arm. Let's talk about the
talk about
Bible,
that.
you know? And so that's
Yeah.
kind of how I thought then, before I just fell in love with the art of it a little
Right.
more.
Yeah.
But along the way, as faith unfolds, at least how it unfolded for me, I'm a lot less legalistic than I used to be. And to me now, it's just all about like the intention of my heart,
Right.
you know? And it's
Right.
like people back then did a lot of those things they weren't supposed to, because the intention of their heart in doing those things had a purpose.
Right.
Sometimes to worship false gods, sometimes they were marking themselves or lashing themselves for the worship of false gods or sacrifices or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, it was
Right.
like a bunch of crazy stuff. So
Right.
maybe you could say I focus on the New Testament a little more, and grace and intention of your heart, and a little less legalistic as far as like the law. But maybe I take it too far.
You sound like what everybody strives to be. I feel like I said, I could talk to you forever about so much of this stuff, and we've even had so many of these conversations privately. But when you jumped into tattooing too, you talked about, and I think this should be the posture of every Christian is, I'm taking Jesus to wherever I am, right? Like I just hope and I pray that people see some form of Jesus through me. Like I'll never forget, just at a thing I was doing at an Indian reservation with Next Step Ministries, I would get to kind of preach at night these devotional talks to groups of students who would come in, and then they would write, we would write, and you might have gone on one of these trips too, where you would end up at the end of the week, you would write letters to people, like little note cards, and you'd stick them in people's little kind of mailboxes that they would have, whether it was people in your youth group or people that were on staff with Next Step or whoever leading your trip. So you would get to read these cards, and I would read these cards at the end of every week that these students would leave, and then I would never get to see them again. But the most, like, I've only pulled it out a couple times and read these cards, like, in the past 10 years. But every time I do, I just start weeping, like, because the biggest compliment anybody has ever given me is that I was the most Jesus they have ever seen in a person. And they don't know about me. They don't know about my life. They don't know, they know what they saw that week, and like, praise God for that. But, all of us are taking Jesus into our workplace, into our profession, into our art, into the marketplace, into our schools, into our homes. I'm curious, when you set out to do tattooing, you specifically told me, like, there's a huge way to minister to people, like, when you are tattooing. And this could probably be said for anything, any profession, but I would love to know, from you, how do you see that as a ministry? Because I know that you do, and I wouldn't ask you that to like force you to say like, oh, tattooing's a ministry, because I don't think everybody views it that way. But I think that you do. I think that you view it as opportunities to be a light for Christ to people, whether that's, you're directly sharing the gospel with somebody or hearing somebody's story. Like, how would you say your faith plays a part in what you get to do professionally now?
Let's see.
Because I bet you see some wild folks.
Absolutely.
I bet you see some super clean cut folks that, you wouldn't think have any problems in their life or anything like that.
So this, honestly, the intention behind it for me goes back quite a ways. Growing up, we were a little sheltered as far as like what we could be involved in.
We were sheltered at our house.
I ended up getting into a heavy metal band,
right.
And it was a Christian band, and that was back when our mom said all metal is the devil. You know what I mean? Like, it was,
couldn't understand what they were saying, so it had to be the devil.
It was like that.
Yeah, I know it was like that.
And so it kind of started there for me, as far as like, well, why does that realm have to be deemed Satan's?
Yeah.
Like, it was God's first. And so continuing from that's when my mindset sort of developed within the thought patterns of like, as Christians, we are kind of set apart in these places that are deemed safe, I guess you would say. We're told not to you know, I wouldn't say not to like associate with other people groups, but like don't surround yourself with people that will drag you down, you know.
Yeah, it can certainly be implied.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So because of that, I always thought that, you know, why would like our sole mission, the Great Commission in the Bible, like our mission is to take the gospel, which is inside of us and has crafted us.
Right.
You know, God has crafted us to be who he wants us to be, and his spirit manifests through us in different ways, different in me than in you.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
And
sure.
I've just always had, I guess, a different train of thought as far as like, why not be the light in the dark places?
Yeah.
Why, like, should I work in a church or in some kind of legit ministry instead of be a tattooer, you
Right.
know? Like, and if so, why not take the gospel to the dark places and be the light instead of just hang out where it already is?
Yeah.
You know, like someone has to do it. I believe that God has crafted me to not just be able to do it with the skill sets,
Right.
but also like have the desire to do it. And specifically talking about tattooing, that doesn't mean having a gospel conversation with all of my clients. You know, like at the end of the day, I'm passionate and driven about what I do as an artist, and I show up to work. But
I mean, you're tattooing people for like 10 hours at a time sometimes, right? I mean, you've got to have some decent conversations about life, right? And just about the struggle and the joy and, you know, everything people are going through. So, I mean, do you
the nature of it is, you know, you have conversations with your clients.
Yeah. Do you think it like inherently fosters like just the nature of what's happening? Like, you know, you're just together, you know, a lot of times putting like really personal stuff on people. Do you try to ask like, why do you want this tattoo? Or like, what does this mean to you? You know, do people just does that break open stories to hear from people? Do they just like open the floodgates and just kind of tell you way more than you want to know a lot of times?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's been cases where I could have sworn people were just there for a therapy session, so that they could have someone to talk to.
Just to talk. Yeah.
Wow. But yeah, I mean, it's an honor to be able to be that person that for some reason that's therapeutic to people.
Yeah.
And there's designs all the time that have meaning to people. You know, it doesn't just have to be someone that died and it's a memorial piece to them and
right.
a hard time they went through. A lot of it is like, a lot of people get spiritual tattoos and they'll talk about.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned like therapy sessions and just kind of joke about it, but there's probably just a lot of meaning in the fact that people get to actually just express their heart to someone, things they're going through, all that kind of stuff. You know, when I think about that, I really think about something that Bria said to me, my wife, one time and she's a dentist, and I was saying something about ministry and kind of, I don't think I meant to communicate this, but what I ended up communicating was that what she was doing wasn't as important as what I was doing because I was working at a church. And I didn't even realize I was doing it, but she even like with tears in her eyes said like, this is my ministry. Like, this is where God has led me. This is my ministry. Like, I care for people, you know, and I think about the amount of people who do care for people, and it looks a little bit different than the way that I, you know, when I was working at a church, cared for people. So, you know, something I know that you really do care about is, like we had talked about before, taking Jesus with you wherever you go. And like, you can't escape ministry. Do you want to kind of speak into that a little bit? Because I know it's a posture you carry with you.
Yeah. Generally, I think that God crafts us in different ways with the passions that we have and our own personalities, and you know, everything about us that makes us different from someone else is given to us by God.
Sure.
So I believe that God's spirit is inside of me. It's inside of you. And whatever we do in our professions or our daily lives, like our life is ministry.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just being in a church. It's not just doing certain ministries, like, you know, even good ministries like working at a homeless shelter or, you know, food drives, whatever you want to name when you think of like serving or ministry or, you know, stuff like that. Those are the things that I kind of think of, the organized things. But it's like, no, like there's an industry that I'm a part of that just so happens to be like a very dark industry, where, you know, it's even less common to meet Christians in that industry than probably other industries. And it's literally my job to be who I am, you know, in spite of that. Yeah. Like go into those dark places and just be me. Being a Christian or, you know, being a tattooer and that being my ministry doesn't mean that every day I wake up and share the gospel with my client. What it means is I conduct myself and my business in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. And I simply love people. I have those conversations with people. Sometimes they lead to spiritual conversations. And when they do, I'll, you know, completely take advantage of that. And it's awesome. And I want it to happen more, but, you know, conversations don't always go that way. It doesn't mean that I'm not still loving people with how I treat them, you know, and how I talk, you know, your form of speech. Like I feel like there's other ways for the light to shine to people than just specifically telling them about Jesus. Yeah.
It's probably got to be hard too, because you can get like drug into areas of conversation that you actually are kind of like, probably should stay away from this. Like, probably don't have too much to speak into this conversation. Yeah, man. No, that's so good. A friend and I, Ryan Furr, you know Ryan. Shout out to Ryan.
What up?
Check out Beardly Creative and Ryan Furr on YouTube. But we had a conversation recently about how ministry is not just working at a church. And, you know, a lot of times at churches, we kind of end up communicating to people, you know, through means of like, you know, there's this avenue to go into ministry as a vocation. And a lot of times that looks like maybe like a Bible college or like a seminary education. And then suddenly like, it's like, okay, God's called me into ministry, which is kind of a wild thought anyway, right? Because everyone's, you know, so many people can say, well, God called me into ministry, and somebody could hear them talk and say, nope, that wasn't God. Like, might've been the pizza, you know, wasn't God. Yeah. And that's not to throw stones at people who, you know, God actually has called into something that aren't particularly gifted in what people think they should be gifted in. But, you know, I say that to say it's really common for us to subtly communicate that if you're not working at a church or in a parachurch ministry, you know, like Crew or something like that, that you are not in ministry, that you're not a minister, that you're not supposed to be doing the same thing I'm doing, you know, if I'm working at a church. And then you can't be surprised when people act like, well, you're on staff at a church, so you should do everything because you're the person that's supposed to do ministry. And it's like, no, we're supposed to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. And that's people who are working in tattoo shops and, you know, wherever else they might find themselves. So, no, I'm so glad to hear you say that. And seriously, like, I'm just proud of, you know, the person that you are, getting to watch your whole journey. I mean, there are hours and hours of more conversations that I hope that we can have, you know, on the podcast, and things, you know, that we can even dive into a little deeper, you know, if you're willing to talk about. So, with all that said, I think the camera has died once on us, and I just want to thank Tracy for being here. Thank you so much. And it is like 12:30, almost 1 o'clock in the morning. So we're going to wrap it up there and look forward to Tracy's conversation next time. But any last thoughts before we close?
I'm ready for round 2. Let's go.
Ready for round 2?
No,
I'll let you
really,
pick the topics.
Yeah, really just on that last conversation. I think that God's Spirit is contagious. It's infectious, you know, like I think that if you are living, you know, if you are at all obeying God's call on your life as far as just the call to love him, right, you know, and to serve him, right, and to worship him, I think that people can see that through who you are, through your speech, through your conduct, the way you conduct business, you know, like everything about it. So the goal is just to love people.
Yeah. 2 greatest commandments, love God and love people. It's like really easy, but really, really hard at the same time. Yeah. But I think you do a good job at it. So props to you. I think anybody who knows you would say the same thing. So, we'll wrap it up there, but thank you so much for being on. And if you want to know more about Tracy and Golden Press Studio, where he works, his tattoo shop is called Golden Press Tattoos, right, in Franklin, Indiana, near the square. And so I would love for anybody who's interested in getting a tattoo to check out Tracy, check out his wife, Liz, on their Instagram pages, Facebook pages. You could probably search them under Tracy Scott or Liz Scott. On either of those platforms, and then schedule appointments, things like that. And so it's what he does all day, every day. One of these days, he'll probably talk me into getting one.
Been trying.
And it better be free.